Hello and welcome to another daily dose of HutVent. And today we're going to be looking at this 1915 bugle. It belonged to a drummer of the 7th Service Battalion of the Suffolk Regiment. Sadly, I don't know his name, but what it does do, it gives us the opportunity to look at the role of drummers. There were no buglers as a rank, the rank was drummer, and a bit of an understanding as to what their actual role was. So first of all, a quick look at the bugle itself. They're very plain, and whatever the local antique dealer tells you, they never had badges soldered onto them. They might have engravings, they might have presentation details, but the vast majority would just have the name of the company that made it. In this case, it's Besson & Co. 1915, and the acceptance arrow, the broad arrow for the Board of Ordnance. And sometimes they might just have a number to show that it's one of 16 or whatever bugles in the battalion. And they would never have the drummer's name or number on because they didn't belong to them. It was unit property. And so apart from that, they tended to be quite plain. Non-royal regiments, so the Suffolk Regiment, not being the Royal Suffolk Regiment, just the Suffolk Regiment, had these plain green bugle cords. Royal regiments had red, yellow and blue ones, and there were some specific unit ones, but non-royal regiments generally had these plain green. The drummers had a set of bugle cords that they wore on their jackets, and the bugle would then be slung, worn on the right hip, so that they could then swing it up and play it when they needed it. The drummers were often boy soldiers. They joined as boys. You could join the army as a boy between the ages of 14 and 16, and your rank was boy, and go into the Corps of Drums as a drummer. And you wouldn't then become a proper soldier until your 18th birthday. And the drummers in the Corps of Drums, there were normally 16 of them, 4 per company, and a drum sergeant. And within that, the drummers themselves had to be able to play the bugle. That came as standard. You all had to be able to play the bugle. And then normally, you either had to be able to play the drums or the fife. Some could do all three. In fact, most could do all three. So when the Corps of Drums were on the march, normally half of them were playing drums, the other half were playing fife, and all of them carrying the bugle slung, except for the bass drummer, for obvious reasons, didn't have the capacity to carry a bugle as well as the bass drum. In peacetime or before they go to France, the bugle was the means of moving your men around camp. So the whole day was pretty much controlled by bugles. So you woke up to reveille. There'd be mail calls, there'd be cookhouse calls. There were specific calls for particular groups of soldiers or units of soldiers, so that they need us, and then it would tell you where you've got to go. Right up to in the evening, obviously the sunset and then lights out. However, when you actually got onto the battlefield, they had a very, very important role to play. And the company commander would have his bugler with him at all times. And in an age before wireless, there's no means of communicating. You can't shout, but the bugle would be a great way of making sure that all your soldiers could hear. We often think of whistles being blown with soldiers going over the top, but it was just as likely that those sounds were played by the drummers playing the bugles to signal the advance. And to move your unit around the battlefield, there would be the call for C Company. Oh, he wants us to move. Oh, and he's now asking us to move to the right, and off they'd go to the right. It was a great way of moving your unit across the battlefield. When you came out of the line, you would form back up into your Corps of Drums, and it was good for morale. As you're marching down the road, they're playing tunes to lift your spirits. And some units had a Corps of Drums and a band, but the bands were very, very difficult to sustain, because obviously with casualties, it was not so difficult to retain a Corps of Drums where basically all of your musicians can play the same instruments than a band when suddenly you've lost specific musicians who you need to play certain bits of music. So the Corps of Drums do tend to stay pretty much right until the end of the war in most units. Some units managed to keep the band, but in most units the Corps of Drums was the one that that was retained right the way through until the end. Generally speaking, after the Battle of the Somme, the use of the buglers on the battlefield starts to wane, as much as anything, because they can't replace the lost casualties. So the skill required to play the particular calls starts to drop off, and it would take again really until after the war before that starts to build up again. But like I say, nowadays we look at the bugle and we just think it's a musical instrument. But at the time, it was very, very much an instrument of war.